today we're going to show how to add a new domain to an OADA installation. And so just like Nginx or Apache or anything like that, if you want the same OADA instance to serve multiple different domain names from the outside world when they come to the machine, then you've got to give it a config that lets it know I want you to serve that domain and set up SSL certificates and things like that for it. So if you take a look in the top level of the OADA Service Docker codebase, you'll see there are two folders, one named Domains Available and one named Domains Enabled. And the way this is going to work is we're going to make a folder in Domains Available for our new domain, and then we're going to symlink it to Domains Enabled, and that's what's going to actually trigger it to be included in the installation. So it can live in Domains Available all at once and not harm anything, and then as soon as it's in Domains Enabled, then OADA is going to start serving that, at least once you tell the containers to look back at Domains Enabled. So we're going to go in Domains Available. So the first step is just take the sample one that's there for localhost that comes bundled with it and just copy it to the same name as the domain that you want. So if our domain is going to be test.example.com, let's say, then we're going to go ahead and create a folder named test.example.com. And then we can go inside of that folder and see there's several different things included in here by default. And so one of the first things that we're going to do is create a set of signing keys so that when your installation does an OpenID Connect request from this instance to another Trellis instance to allow a user to log in using remote credentials, you're going to need some signing keys for it to be able to do that. And so within the admin container in OADA, there's a script called OADA certs that lets you go ahead and create those. And so we're going to go ahead and first create those keys for ourselves right here. And so we can run the admin container by just doing OADA run --rm. That just means when we're done with the admin container, throw it away. I don't need you to keep a copy of it and keep building up old stale copies of things. And we're going to just run the admin container directly. And now the Domains Available folder is in the admin container mapped to the root Domains Available, so is Domains Enabled. Excuse me. So you'll see our folder that we just created there. We can go in there. We see the keys that are there. And so to create new keys, we would do -- create keys, except it's going to refuse to do it because this actually is a destructive operation. Like it's going to get rid of a potential private key that you could not recover otherwise. And so it requires you to actually pass the -- force flag. Otherwise, it'll just warn you, I'm not going to do it unless you force me to. And so we pass -- force, and now it has created the same files, public key.jwk, private key.pem, public key.pem. And those are the things we're going to need to put into our unsigned software statements. So we can get rid of that, or get out of this admin container for now. And we just start with the two JS files, the config.js and the unsigned software statement. And we change localhost everywhere inside of this to the new domain we have, test.example.com. So we'll change the domain, the base URI, and that's it in that particular file. You'll notice it's going to actually read the keys that it needs in the config from these other files that are in the folder directly. Then the other thing it needs is the unsigned software statement. This is what describes to the outside service who you are, or who you are as a developer when your service is making a request to them for an OpenID Connect login. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to replace localhost with our domain here, and then you probably want to go ahead and change contacts to your name and your email address. And then we can change the client name. This is not really used for anything. It's just, it would be used to display to a user on the other end of the OpenID Connect request to say who you are. Then the other thing that's important is with your developer certificate, it's going to get signed, and you're going to have a key in there that you say, this is my public key. And so we want to delete the default public key that was in there from localhost because you're not signing things with that anymore. And we want to just paste in the JWK that we just created. So now we've got a that's what we just pasted into the keys array here. And so now we're done setting that up. Now what we need to do is create a signed version of this unsigned software statement. Now, if you wanted to be a trusted developer, you need to sign the unsigned software statement with a private key that has its corresponding public key on the trusted list, or on a trusted list at least. And right now, we don't really have that, so we can just sign it directly with the private key that's in this folder that we created. That would be sort of calling it self-signed, a self-signed certificate, and that won't be trusted. So when someone goes to do this redirect from your installation, it'll say this is not a trusted developer. You can still allow it to go through, but it'll say it's not trusted. Just like on the web, it's going to tell you that your SSL certificate's not trusted. But it's up to the user at that point in time. So now we have the unsigned software statement, the keys, and we're going to go into the admin container and actually sign them. So we're going to go back to domains available. We're going to go into our domain folder and we're going to run OADA search directly. OADA search is, by default, will look for all the file names that we have here for the different keys and the unsigned software statement and so on. You can override those with command line flags, but if you're just doing it this way, you can just run it without any commands, and it created the signed software statement then. And so that's what this looks like. It looks like a great big JWT. You can actually paste this into jwt.io if you want to see what's inside of this thing, to see what's actually there. It's actually just your unsigned software statement, signed with a header and a footer around it. And so the other things that are in this folder, if you want to change them, the auth ww folder, that's where the logo goes. Right now it's the OpenAG Data Alliance logo. Excuse me. If you want to change that, then you would just swap out logo.ping for your own. And that sets up the domain. Now, we don't have a certificate at this point. If we have our own SSL certificate that we want to use, then we need to create a folder here named certs. And then in here, we would create the same name domain folder because it's going to symlink this into Nginx for us. And so in here, we would want to create, if you have one, you'd want to create the fullchain.pem, and you would want to create private key.pem. And if you name them these things, then the default Nginx config in the proxy container, when it comes up, it'll look for these in the search folder, and it won't try to override them. It will use these by default automatically. And so that's how you would override a cert. Now, if you want to name them something else, then you're going to have to also override the Nginx site for this, which is a similar process. You create another folder here at this level and switch it out. But we're not going to do that. We're going to use the Let's Encrypt model. So now we've got the domain set up. All the information is there for Nginx to serve it, except it doesn't have an SSL certificate. And so if we want to use Let's Encrypt to get that, then we need to tell the proxy container to go ahead and serve that the new domain that we have. And so there's two things to do. First, we go to domains available, or domains enabled, I'm sorry. And we're going to make a symlink back to our domains available folder. This is really important. This symlink has to be relative path, not an absolute path, because inside the containers, the path doesn't look the same as it does here. It only looks the same relative to where you're at. So we want to make a symlink. So the format is symlink and then the target and the link name. So we're going to go up one directory from here, domains available, and test.example.com, and we want to name it the same thing. So you'll see that makes a symlink for us right here that goes back up to our other folder. By making that symlink, that's what allows Nginx and the other containers to pull this domain out and use it actively. And so now we just need to restart proxy. When we restart proxy, that will trigger this new domain to be parsed and used. And so now when Let's Encrypt tries to do its token exchange back and forth behind the scenes, Nginx will go ahead and serve that up for us in the appropriate places, so we don't have to worry about that. So to trigger Let's Encrypt, there's a handy little script in the admin container. It's called initiate Let's Encrypt all domains. And basically what it does is it goes to that domains enabled folder, LS's everything there, removes localhost from the list, creates a single request to Let's Encrypt for that one domain, and sends it off. And so if we just run initiate Let's Encrypt all domains right now, it'll do that, it'll get the certificates, and it'll automatically symlink them where they need to go for Nginx to pick them up for all the domains that are here. It'll actually use the same one for all the domains. And so I'm not going to run it now because it's not going to work because I'm not actually on a domain. I just created a dummy domain. But that's how you would do it. Once you run that, it'll tell you at the end you need to restart proxy now. And then you would just come back out of admin and do OADA restart proxy. And as soon as you've done that, you are good to go. You're done, you're ready, and your installation should be serving your domain, and you can go check it with to see if it has a valid HTTPS certificate. And so that is it. Now, just to dig in, that sets you up. Just to dig in a little bit to let you know what's going on behind the scenes, most of the work is done here in either the auth container or the proxy container in the core of OADA. So in the auth container, that's where it's going to pull those configs to figure out the name of your service and stuff to put into the login screens, because the auth container is what serves the login screens. It's also the one that's going to handle getting the private keys and things when it needs to sign the OpenID Connect requests. So that aside, all the other heavy lifting happens in the proxy container. So in proxy, there is an entry point.sh script. So most of the services we have in OADA all start at their own entry point script. And so if we look at this entry point script, it's going to do a lot of stuff. For one thing, it's going to look to see if there's any certs available for a particular domain already, and if there aren't, it won't override it. But if there's not a cert available, it's going to try to make your installation work as best it can. So it's going to symlink the localhost one into that domain for you, so that you'll at least have a self-signed certificate, so it should be able to come up. And then it's going to go through all the domains that it finds in domains enabled right here. And then it's going to go and see, do I need to override it with any of the manual certificates that are in that we put in that I showed you a minute ago. And then after that, it's going to come down and look for any sites enabled. I mentioned you could override the actual Nginx config itself by making a sites enabled folder inside of your domains enabled directory. And so if you make a sites enabled folder, it'll symlink that into Nginx's sites enabled. And otherwise, if you didn't override it, what it's going to do is take the template in localhost, and it's going to replace all instances of this particular variable domain with the name of the domain that is the folder. And so that's, in that way, the localhost one acts as a sort of basic template that as long as you replace localhost with the right domain, it'll work exactly the same for your domain as well. So you can override that if you want, but otherwise it'll just assume you want to use the template. So that's what's going on behind the scenes when you bring up proxy. It's going to tell you about that in its logs. And so that's how you set up a new domain for OADA.